Hello, my name's Leslie, and it's a month since my last yarn-related confession. In that time I haven't bought any yarn. I don't seem to have used much either. I only record it when I finish an item. So it looks like in the whole of, February, I've used up 280 metres, which doesn't sound very much. There has been an awful lot more on the go, so hopefully there'll be a big blip when I finish something major. This is Heidi being antisocial. Oh, hello, you going to have a look? No. She knows what's coming. Hello and welcome to the second episode of the Not Quite Enough Yarn podcast. My name's Leslie, otherwise known as Lahlah, spelt L-A-H-L-A-H on Ravelry, and on Twitter and Instagram I'm known as Knitting or Death. This is a podcast from the south of England and it's all about yarn crafts, mostly knitting and crochet, but a few other things thrown in as well. Thanks ever so much for coming along and saying hello, even if you're not saying anything because I'm the one doing the talking. Second podcast, and thank you so much to everyone who viewed the first episode. I thought it would be watched by 3 people and a dog, and it's been watched by over 100 people, and to me that is staggering. That is so far beyond my expectations, and I am truly grateful, appreciative. Thank you so much. I really didn't expect those kind of numbers, and I'm humbled and thankful, so really appreciate it. If you found episode 1 and you've come back for more, you're very welcome. You're equally welcome if you've stumbled upon this for the first time. This is a podcast about my hope to reduce my yarn stash. I have more than 2 cupboards worth. Cupboard number 1 is behind me, and more than 2 cupboards is too much for me. So I'm looking to use up what I've got rather than buy more. Given that, you may be wondering why the podcast is called Not Quite Enough Yarn rather than Too Much Yarn, or for God's sake stop buying yarn, something like that. And the reason is I rarely have a sweater quantity of anything or enough to make a full project. And actually the cardigan I'm wearing, which is very old but it's extremely chilly out, and this one comes out every winter, is a fine example of a not quite enough yarn jacket, because it was big ball acrylic, made it probably best part of 30 years ago, and being a larger woman, whereas a big ball acrylic might do a whole sweater for a slimmer person, they don't do it for me. This is really not good quality yarn. You hear about squeaky acrylic, and when I pull this out of the washing machine it genuinely squeaks, but it is quite warm, it's quite snuggly with the shawl collar, and it does the trick when the weather's really chilly. It started off as a grey cardigan, but as you can see it didn't stay that way, so I did the back, I did the front, that's all completely grey, and I realised that there wasn't a lot of yarn left, or certainly not enough to do the rest. I probably did the sleeves next because that's what I do. So a bit of black, probably realised I wasn't going to have enough black either, so a bit of red, or that might have just been to give it a bit of colour interest, and ended up doing pretty much the whole of the front in black, but I didn't want a black piece joined onto a grey piece, so I did this slightly weird zigzaggy pattern. But as in all these things, I call it a design feature rather than desperation. I think that just sounds better. So this is why it's called Not Quite Enough Yarn, when clearly I have far more than I will ever need. Now, one of my friends who saw the last month's podcast said that it should feature more of the dog. So here's a small video of what happened when I tried to tell her that she would be welcome to appear, but that there was no fee involved. It was worth a try. This is a sweater that, or cardigan rather, that I made about 18 months ago. And I'm just going to fiddle around with my phone so that you can see more of it. And as you can see, it is an entrelac cardigan. And it's incredibly warm and cosy. And as I'm feeling rather poorly and I have a croaky throat, for which I apologise, so I'm on the honey and lemon, so cheers everyone. But back to the cardigan. It's from Gwen Bortner's Entree to Entrelac book. I've always been a fan of entrelac. It appeals to my my project knitter status rather than process knitter, in that I like to finish things, so finishing a square at a time, get a sense of achievement. The pattern is called All My Favourites, and it works on the excellent theory that most of us will usually knit with predominantly the same weight of yarn, that we'll have a favourite, and in a broad colour palette as well. And for most knitters that's probably true. Not for everyone, obviously, and certainly this got a lot of purples, a lot of blues, got a few brighter colours in the middle, but predominantly blues into purples. In the original design, she recommends it as a stash buster, because using up all those oddments, if they're in the same sort of colour palette, then you can do a square in each colour and it would be a great coordinated look for a not coordinated pattern, if you see what I mean. And certainly the example in the book, different shades of black, grey and white, very effective. Obviously that's far too simple, not playing that game. I had quite a bit of yarn to use up in a range of different colours, same old story, including some that I had dyed myself. The lovely Jo from Freestyle Fibres used to live near to where I do, and in fact she started the knitting group that I go to, and she ran some dyeing workshops. She knew a lot of spinners as well as dyers, so some people were dyeing fleeces and a few of us were dyeing yarns, and quite a few of these were ones that I dyed. So the rainbowy one, the bluey one, I think the orange one, were yarns that I dyed, trying out different colour schemes. I did this over a period of a couple of years. She ran a couple of these workshops. I went along to, I think, every one that she did. So I ended up with about half a dozen skeins of this, all the same yarn. It was a Blueface Leicester double knitting weight yarn, but quite a range of colours. So I decided to use them in this sweater. A lot of other stuff in there as well. There's some collarette. The borders are done in Knit 1 Crochet 2 wick, which is actually half soy. There are a couple of Zitron yarns in there. There's Lifestyle and Trekking 6-ply. No, actually that's not the Trekking. I know it's here somewhere. There's the Trekking. So a range of yarns. I made a couple of modifications to the jacket. I added a couple of extra rows of squares to the length of it. I wanted quite a long garment, and because it was longer and sort of going over my hips, I then increased the size slightly. The way this works on the sizing is that the number of stitches in the squares, and therefore the number of rows in the squares, determines your size. Given how clumsy that could be, the fit on it is pretty amazing. The sleeves just fit exactly the way I like. I don't like a fluffy sleeve, I don't like a baggy, I don't like a leg of mutton. I like a fitted sleeve, and this is absolutely spot on. If it looks lumpy, it's because I've got a rolled up cuff on my shirt underneath. So yes, really great design, very cleverly done. We'll probably make another one. I may try a fingering weight one. I've got to rework some numbers because the pattern was for double knitting, so I've got to make sure that my stitches in fingering equal the same size squares. The only thing I would change about the design is the V is quite low. I would normally want my V to finish about here and not 6 inches below that. I don't know that there's an awful lot that can be done about that, because of the way that the squares and the half squares fall, and to get such a nice fit on the shoulder, you're then working with a fairly sort of specific line. But generally a lovely cardigan. It's really warm and cosy, and I like entrelac with variegated yarns. Pooling in colour, sometimes it can look great, sometimes I know some crocheters who do deliberate pooling where you get these lovely argyle patterns, fantastic. I prefer my pooling to be quite small in batches. Excuse me. And this is why I really like entrelac, because it concentrates the blocks of colour. There was a post on Ravelry, I think it was on the yarn thread, a few weeks ago, and someone had bought some yarn and it had a stronger colour change in it than they'd realised, so they were looking for ideas because they don't like pooling at all, and I think they thought they'd bought a semi-solid when it had this sort of blast of another colour. And I was just about to add my helpful suggestion of something like entrelac, and the original poster put up an extra post in the thread and saying, oh, not entrelac because it looks messy enough anyway. I think it looks even worse with entrelac. Well, obviously that's her opinion, and everyone is entitled to their opinions, even when they're completely wrong. I'm joking. She can do what she likes. Her yarn, her needles. She's the one who's going to have to wear it. But for me, I like the way that it concentrates the colour and gives a better definition than just splodges of colour or the lines that you get with variegated. That I personally don't like at all. Finished object news, and I've finished Simon. Simon being the cowl that I completely misnamed last time. It's the Joyful Cowl by Heather Anderson Designs. It was a knit-along, first knit-along I'd done over 5 weeks, and I finished. I wasn't entirely on time with it. I think I was a few days behind with each thing, but it's come out really well. Once one has knitted a cowl, if one wants to block one's cowl, that then becomes challenging. Blocking flat pieces, piece of cake, pin them out on boards, no problem at all. Something that's a tube, and a shaped tube at that, different proposition. Now, some people are geniuses, genii, whichever the plural is, and there are some folks on Ravelry who have plumbing pipe, and they put that in place, wrap the cowl around it, or slot them into the cowl and around it, pin out those, absolutely fine. I don't have plumbing pipe around the place, and didn't feel the need to go and get any, so I went for an alternative method of blocking, and I'll be back in just one moment. And I'm going to call this the Patent Leslie plastic folder blocking method. I have a number of these plastic folders, as you can see. I actually use them when I'm doing designs for magazines, because they're handy to keep all the sketches and swatches and yarn samples and ball bands all together. Never have I had all of these operational in one go, but the nature of magazine design is you could be starting Christmas already and it's February, so things take a long time to get through the process and published and out the other side. So I have a lot of these folders, which I dearly love, and I just kept slotting them in until the cowl was not stretched, but fairly full. I then wet blocked half of it, let that dry, turned the whole thing upside down, wet blocked the other half of it, let that dry. And so it is now finished. Ba 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 ba. And these boxes don't want to play for coming out. Obviously they're very attached to it. So this was the Joyful Cowl by Heather Anderson Designs. And it really was a good project for me. I'm not sure I'm into the whole kind of knit along. Let me show you my progress of how many stitches I've knitted this week. I just wanted to knit it when I could and kind of get on with it. But in terms of techniques, absolutely brilliant. Some I'd done before. It has beads in it. I've put beads in projects before. There were some textural things that I hadn't tried. This uses a yarn over for texture, and it's a different stitch. The one that was a real revelation for me that I absolutely love is the linen stitch. I really like it for its interest, for its texture, and for the fact that it's really quick and easy to do. To me, it's called linen stitch in the pattern. To me, linen stitch is something that looks slightly different, but I'm wondering if it's the back of it that I'm normally thinking of. But either way, very happy with that. So yes, very pleased to have finished my cowl. I'm not ordinarily a cowl wearer, but given what my throat's like at the moment, it's probably sensible. Heather Anderson Designs Joyful Cowl, and it was knitted with Fibre Space Scrumptious. Now this is a cashmere, no it's not, it's a merino and silk yarn, so it feels absolutely lovely. It's really soft and feels very luxurious, so happy with that. Having finished a knit along, and despite all my reservations about not being a let's all join in kind of person, I had already signed up for another, which I'm about to share with you now. So I've signed up for a second knit along. The pattern is for a bag. It's the Elizabethan Stranded bag by Mrs. Buttons Designs, and again it's a Ravelry knit along. Give you a quick picture. I print everything off in black and white, so apologies that that's not very exciting. And I thought I'd try something else. I don't know that I actually need a bag. I might make it into a cushion when I've finished. I'll see how I feel. But it's a while since I've done some stranded work, and I thought I ought to get my hand in a bit. A lot of podcasters seem to be doing stranded this year. A lot of the Scandinavian sweaters and that sort of thing. Gorgeous mittens over Christmas, of course. And I was feeling left out. I thought I'd give this a go. And again, we are stash busting. So this is some Aslan Trends alpaca yarn that my lovely husband bought for me on a trip to the States, and we were working it out probably about 7 years ago. That's scary. But it's a lovely yarn. It's Aran weight. I tend to use probably predominantly double knitting weight yarn, but this is Aran weight. A couple of different colours, as you can see. And I've not found a use for it. Lovely soft, but not too much of a fuzzy halo for alpaca. Sometimes that can be a bit fluffy. This is not, this is lovely. Now obviously these two colours create quite a subtle stranded effect, relatively speaking. It's not like a real black and white, red and white type of thing, but it's coming along quite nicely. It doesn't bother me that it's not too in your face. And I know there used to be a phrase, blue and green should not be seen except with something in between. Well, this is what I've got, dear chum, so you can stick it. And so this is just really using up what I've got. When I saw the project, I had a look on the stash, see what I had that were the right sort of weights of yarn. 201 metres required on the pattern, 200 metres in these balls. So I haven't left terribly long ends for sewing up, just in case. I may have to sew up in something else of a similar colour. This is week 1 and a little bit of week 2, and it's worked from the top of the bag down. So we're about to start on some of the bigger patterns, and so far so good. When I've done stranded knitting in the past, I've always had a bit of an obsession about really small floats, and I've tried to twist the yarn every couple of stitches. And that hasn't necessarily been terribly successful. I can't remember where I got that idea from. It must have been a knitting book I read back in the late 17th century or something. But it really isn't necessary. I was worried that if my floats were too long, then it would pull in the fabric too much. But so far so good. It is a firmer fabric, but that's what you're going to get with any Fair Isle or stranded knitting. The floats are looking fairly neat. Mrs. Buttons recommends that if you are knitting a gap of 7 stitches, say, between the same colour, twist after about 5. So she recommends 5 as a maximum float length. And this is coming along very nicely. Looking forward to working on more of it. needs good light and patience. I don't always have both. It's winter and I don't always have patience. But it's a lovely yarn. Really liking how this feels. Again, it's my soft tactile thing that just really squidgy and cosy and lovely. So yes, I will give you a progress on that as it goes along. That's the Elizabethan Stranded Bag by Mrs. Button Designs, and it's a knit along currently taking place on Ravelry. Got a couple of finished objects to show. They were very quick makes, and the first was inspired by the knit along cowl which I've been using, and I was out walking the dog and I felt as if I wanted to pull it up over my head more, and I thought actually what I want isn't a cowl, it's what we used to call a snood. I grew up in the 80s. They became very sort of laughed at, out of fashion, like sort of, you know, bad leg warmers and flares or something. So they went out very out of fashion, but not a bad garment to have, a bad accessory to have. So I wanted a snood. So I was thinking, what have I got in the stash? And last year, a friend wanted to buy me a gift, which was very kind of her. And she's not a knitter, but she said, I don't know what to get you. I said, well, she'd be very difficult to buy for. I said, well, I can't be. There are yarn shops. I've been in them. They're nice. So she said, well, I don't know what to get. I said, please, anything. Because I love looking at what I've got and then seeing what I can make with it. I know for a lot of people that's the wrong way round, and they see a pattern they like, they think that's nice, they go and buy the yarn, sometimes even in the same colour as the pattern, and then make the item. And that makes perfect sense to me. If I was walking past a shop and saw a really nice red shirt, I wouldn't necessarily go in and buy a pair of blue trousers. I've gone in because I want the red shirt. But I'm kind of the other way round with my knitting. So she very kindly got me this yarn, which is made by Lion brand, and the yarn is called Quickie. That's not a word that would get through a British focus group, I think. Quickie has too many other meanings, but Quickie is what it is, and as you can see, it's a very, very thick yarn. It's almost like a roving held together with what feels a bit like sewing cotton. So really thick, very soft, and puts a few fibres all over the place, but very soft. So I thought, what can I do with that? This is perfect. It requires large needles, but luckily I have 25 mils and I'm not afraid to use them. They are very heavy once you've got a bit of work on them. The needles themselves aren't, they're hollow plastic, that's easy. They are a bit cumbersome, and the following little minute of video taken by himself will show what I mean, because this is not a smooth knitting action. Right, so this is what knitting with 25mm needles looks like. And my husband thinks it's funny, don't you, darling?
I do.
And why do you think it looks funny?
It looks bizarre.
It certainly is a bit cumbersome. Not as quick as my normal knitting, would you say?
Not quite. Not quite.
Marvellous. But it should grow really quickly. So hopefully I'll get this finished this evening.
Well, there we go.
So I've got my yarn, I've got my big needles. I feel a bit like Harry Potter actually. Accio cowl! Well, almost. So this is my very large, very snuggly cowl slash snood. It is incredibly warm and soft. I feel like I could just lean against the side of a chair and go to sleep and it would support my neck. Also, of course, it does what I want it to do, which is, if I'm outside, comes up over the head. Okay, it's not the most elegant looking snood, they're normally much finer, but this is really warm, and when I'm out with the hound, that's my absolute priority. Really simple. I can take it off because I'm not outside and I'll fade away with heat. 15 stitches, worked in moss stitch until I ran out of yarn, and then I sewed it into a tube. I'm not going to try and sell that pattern. I think anyone could work it out. So very happy with it. Like I say, the only thing is the fibres do keep coming off a bit, so I might need to wash it a couple of times. One other disappointment with the yarn is that one of the balls had a knot in it and a completely different colour. Well, I say completely different. Lost a lot of the black, looks a bit washed out in comparison. Now, in this item, in this snood cowl, doesn't really matter, it just looks like a stripe. But if I'd been making something where it did matter, I would be very upset. There's only 20 metres in each ball of yarn. You'd think they could get a consistent 20 metres, wouldn't you? But, like I say, in this item, doesn't matter. And it is very warm, snuggly and cosy. So that's my first quick make finished item. The other difficulty I had with it is, given the thickness of this yarn, sewing it up. What does one do? Well, the obvious thing is to get a different type of yarn and sew it up. I had a bit of this left over. As you can see, I still have this much. So I guess technically I've only used 79 metres of yarn, not 80. No way I can get that through a darning needle. None of the sewing needles I have would have a big enough eye. So I just used a crochet hook to pull the yarn through and sort of hook it round a few times, and secured the seam that way. So cosy, lovely. Item number 1. Item number 2 relates to small people. Last month I showed you the little jacket that I'd made, the Little Explorer. That was for a baby about to be born. He's now arrived very safely. Noah, bless him, looks absolutely adorable. Haven't seen him in person, seen photographs. Looks like a real sweetheart. And Noah has a big brother called Zach, who is 2.5 and loves dinosaurs. And because I was making something for Noah, wanted to make something for Zach as well, so I decided to make him a hat. And here it is. So here is said hat. It's the Stegosaurus dinosaur hat by Sarah Boccolucci. I'm not sure, as you can tell, but it's a very simple crochet hat. So you just make it in the round and then make the pieces and sew them on. I made a couple of modifications. I made it slightly shorter than the initial pattern. It said sort of 4.5 to 5 inches. I felt that it was getting long enough. I think I stopped at about 4 inches after the increases. So that was seemed about the right size. The plates I made in the same colour. The pattern initially said do them in a contrast colour, which I could have done. I have the yarn. It occurred to me that every time I've seen a representation of a Stegosaurus, the plates aren't a different colour to the rest of the body. That seemed odd. So I decided to make them the same colour. Another couple of modifications. In the original pattern, the edging is 2 rows of slip stitch. And I decided to do a crab stitch edging, which I hope you can see. Again, I was worried it was a little bit of this is my standard edging, because I like a crab stitch. But I thought in this case it was particularly appropriate because it gave that slightly sort of uneven edge in a good way, which I felt would be more appropriate for a rugged dinosaur. And the final modification was the plates I made. I didn't have the right hook size. The hooks, the pattern said 3.75 hook size for the plates. The rest is done in a 5.5mm hook. And I didn't have the right size, but what I decided to do was do each plate in a different size hook, so they do get progressively larger. I hope that he likes the hat. I hope that it keeps him warm. I hope that it does the trick. I'm going to get this in the post to him with the little jacket for his brother, and look forward to seeing pictures of him wearing it, I hope. As you can see, I've got this modelled on a plastic head. I'm not showing you the whole thing because I know that some people get a little bit freaked out by plastic heads and artificial heads. I have 3. I have a man's one, Bert. In fact, I have 2 Berts because I made one into a hat stand with the addition of some glittery Mod Podge and some sheet music. So that's a hat stand. I have Ethel for female hats. It's slightly smaller circumference. I basically got polystyrene ones for blocking hats, for when I make anything, particularly if I'm making patterns to sell, because you want to block them nicely. So just some polystyrene ones, and then I was having trouble finding a child size one, and certainly have never found a polystyrene or a glass one. So I have found this one, and after saying I'm not going to show it to you, I am. I call this one Chucky. You can see why I've covered him up. Nice smile, but just something a little disturbing about him or her. So purely used for blocking and modelling, and in this case, covering up entirely. Well done, Chucky. Good work. The last thing I'm going to show you isn't actually knitted or crocheted. It's not even made of yarn, but it's made for yarn. I have a bit of a fascination with yarn bowls. As you do. And the wooden ones are absolutely beautiful. I like turned wood anyway. I think there's a real depth of colour and texture in it. But they are very, very expensive. And I don't begrudge any craftsperson their worth. But they are a lot of money, and I thought I'd like to have a go at something like that. Now, I have made one in the past. I made a couple with polymer clay, which I found not particularly hard wearing. They tend to snap. Now, it could be I didn't bake them long enough. I don't know why they broke. I may well try another one at some point. But just before Christmas, I decided to try one with air-dried clay. Wasn't a product I'd ever used before, but I thought I'd give it a go. And this is my yarn bowl. So all I did, get a little mixing pudding basin, cover it in cling film, and rolled the clay out and then placed it over it. Now there is, as it's dried, it has shrunk a bit, and underneath the groove you can possibly see a bit of a crack there. So I don't know how long lasting this will be, but I will keep you posted. But I haven't used it yet. A lot of the yarn that I use is in cakes, because I buy it in skeins, so I then put it into cakes to use it. But I do have some that are balls, so I shall use this as appropriate. I tried to make little holes, not quite sure why, but I've tried to make little holes there, but they haven't pushed through, but I'll live with that. So yes, I shall keep you posted as to how successful this is. To decorate, I just had some stamps that I just repeatedly, I don't know if you can see the texture. If I find this is successful, I may paint it. I haven't done, partly because I don't know how well it's going to last. Also, I wasn't sure what to paint it with, because the last thing I want is flecks of paint, little flakes of paint going onto my yarn as I'm crocheting or knitting. So at the moment it's bare white, but I may well paint it or spray it with something if I feel that it's working well and that I want to zhuzh it up a bit. Someone complimented me on this sweater the last time I wore it, so I thought I'd share the story with you. In the sale, always in the sale, always love a bargain, I picked up some Artisanal hummingbird yarn in their woodpecker colourway, which is a lovely red, it's got orange, green, nice bright colourway. And I wanted an alpaca sweater, had a couple of balls of this stuff, and I was going to mix it with other alpacas, so I planned this, and whenever I was at a yarn shop, if they had a sale on, if there was alpaca there, I would get colours that would match in with this woodpecker colourway. And got a lot of greens, a lot of neutrals, so I didn't want everything to be too bright. I then decided that I wanted to make a side-to-side, sort of cuff-to-cuff sweater, and did a swatch, planned it all out, everything was going fine. Then I started knitting it, and you can see in the sleeve, got a bit of red, this is just some plain red, and then I started to use the woodpecker, and I didn't like it. I thought it was too bright, and when you get to see a lot of my knitting, you'll be surprised at that comment, because bright doesn't frighten me. But I thought it would be too bright, so I put in woodpecker. Didn't like the woodpecker. So I decided to stick with the rest of the neutrals, which is why the sweater is predominantly green, beige, quite gentle. Obviously I matched up the other sleeve. I had enough yarn to do that, funnily enough. So I was making the sweater, all absolutely fine. And then I realised I'd made a bit of a design error, in as much as I hadn't allowed enough in the underarm. So much as it would fit nicely across here, I hadn't really left enough room for what I like to call the girls and the fuel cell. Well, that's what I call it. Most people would call it a gut or a stomach, but I'll call it the fuel cell. So I then had to do a bit of improv, and I did that by adding a gusset. So you can actually see there's a diagonal line in here where I added a gusset to give extra width across the back and across the front, but then still tapering into the underarm. So a real improv sweater. I'm actually pleased with the way it's turned out. The neckline has, I decided to go for a garter stitch neckline with just decreases, quite sort of staggered, stepped decreases. And I quite like it. And I do get complimented on this sweater when I wear it. So obviously I'm not the only person who likes it. But it is rather an example of the way I put things together. And to use a phrase I've used before and will no doubt use again, not terribly scientific. I thought I was being scientific. I'd done my swatch, I'd mapped it all out, I'd designed it all, and then forgot something fairly fundamental like it wouldn't fit the things we learn. So a lot of alpaca was used, but none of it was the hummingbird, or very little of it was. And in fact that is still, if I move to the side, it's in the stash. So I will find something nice to do with it. It's such a lovely soft yarn, and the colours in it are great. They just weren't working for this particular project. So I shall find something gorgeous to make with it at some point. I was thinking about that alpaca yarn as I was talking about that sweater, and I thought, what can I do with it? I've got two sort of almost full balls, and it occurred to me it was time to get the loom out. I've had something on the loom for about probably 2 years now, which is just frankly embarrassing. It was a houndstooth. I was interested in trying the technique, tried it, yeah, fun, lovely. So I thought I'd make a scarf with this alpaca. And the thing that people will always tell you about weaving is, oh, the warping takes ages, and it does. This is only part of the process. But as with all things, it's possible to make it more fun. In my case, it's Friday evening. I put some music on. Madonna and I warped this loom. So she was having a ray of light. I was walking up and down my dining room. Sadly, dining table too short. I have to put it up against the fireplace, but there we go. And stage 1 of warping complete. Once you've got it all as you need it for the original strands, technical term here, the hardest part to do on your own is to wind it around and keep some tension in there. This is easier if you've got someone else with you, because then they can hold the end where the knot is and you can pull it nice and tightly as you turn it and put your warp into place. But I'm on my own this evening. Dog doesn't have opposable thumbs, so not really helpful in this context. I say I'm on my own. I'm listening to the radio. It's a 90s indie disco station, and I've just been listening to, I think, Stone Roses. So I'm not on my own. I have their company, and as I recall, in the 90s I was at quite a few things on my own and still enjoyed them. Onwards. This is definitely the guttiest bit of the process, when you have to pull through every other warp thread through these holes. Takes a while, makes my shoulders ache, makes my back ache, but then again I'm quite old. But again, the radio has been playing, got a bit of salt and pepper, which has given me an idea for this month's podcast title. Here's the piece of fabric that I took off the loom. It's something that I'd wanted to try. I was going to do 4 big squares and turn it into a blanket, but it's quite thin, nothing wrong with that, but I like a cosier blanket, and I lost interest. This is not going to come as a surprise, but just as a piece of experimentation, as a piece of houndstooth, Hope you can see that okay. I'm really pleased with how that's turned out. Two different textures of yarn, as you can see. Smooth, darker yarn, and the red is a fluffy, sort of eyelashy type of affair. But yeah, it was a useful exercise. And certainly for a scarf or something like that, a smaller piece, I would try houndstooth again if I had plain solid colour yarns to work on. Not quite sure what to do with this. It's could be the back of a cushion or even the front of a cushion. It actually goes quite well with our three-piece suite, so I may even use it as an antimacassar on one of the chairs. But yeah, that's a little piece of weaving. Right, so it took about an hour in total, but we are now fully warped. Some would say that's a fair description of me most days, but in this particular context, I'm talking about the loom. It's an Ashford Knitter's loom, and the reed that I'm using is 10 dents per inch, which seems about right for double knitting weight yarn, which is what this is. So fully warped, now starting to weave. I'm not the world's neatest weaver, as you can see. Have a few loops on the end, but I'm hoping that when I take it off the loom and it relaxes, these will even out a bit. I do have a stand for this loom, which is a more sociable thing if I want to be in the same room as other people while I'm weaving. But this evening I'm still in my dining room. I'm going to be watching the rest of Amy's Stranded podcast, which I started earlier, and I'm enjoying weaving. I'm enjoying this scarf. I haven't done any for a while, so really liking it, and we'll be interested to see how this all works out. At the moment it just looks fairly stripy, but once we get some length with the warps as well, hopefully it'll be more of a checkered effect. Time will tell. Another day, another 5 minutes in the car, so I thought I'd give you a progress update on the twiddle muff that I'd started in the last podcast. I think I'd done about kind of 3 or 4 rows at that point. As you can see, it has grown considerably. What I've also been doing is putting some texture and interest into the fabric of it. I will be sewing things onto it, and the recommendation when sewing anything onto a twiddle muff is that you do a treble knot at the back, because sometimes the folks using it are quite strong, they can pull bits away, and obviously we don't want it breaking up. So it makes sense to actually build some stuff in. So I've got a couple of bobbles here. I don't know if you can see that. We'll try that. Perhaps if I put it in profile. Looks like a zit, but hopefully you can see what I'm trying to do. That one was formed over 2 rows, so lots of increases in one row and lots of decreases in the next. I've got another one here that was formed with a lot of trebles and then just a slip stitch to pull them together. I've also done some front post stitches, so that one there, not so keen on that one. This one on this side, I quite like this texture. I hope you can see it okay, and may use that in something else. We'll see. It's always nice to try out new things and add them to the armoury. I've also got some loops, so a lot of these are just chain loops. So again, it's just something for people to twiddle with, put their fingers in. This started out, it wasn't going to be a loop. I just did some chains out and then double crochet or single crochet if you're American back. But it just was hanging there and looked rather odd. So I thought I would put that into a loop. I slip stitched it into the next row, so that's all good. Yeah, so it's coming along quite nicely. You may notice in amongst the greens there's a purple row. The yarn it was a long colour change variegated yarn between greens and purples, so that's why there's that odd bit of colour, but I don't think it matters in this case. Coming along pretty well. We'll soon be done. I've had lots of opportunities for it. Himself has been at home looking after the dog, so I've been out and about more and spending quite a bit more time in the car. So that's why I've got quite a bit of stuff done. Also, that's why I've added in the interest, because if I've just got 5 minutes and pick it up, I just tend to do a row. Whereas if I know I've got a bit longer, then I will spend some time thinking about different bits and pieces for it. So that's why there's more variation in this one. But we're nearly there, getting towards the size that I need. So at the risk of sounding a little bit all-matron, I've nearly got my 12 inches. What more could a girl want? So that's about it for this month. Thank you very much for stopping by. Hope to see you again in about a month's time. May whatever you start bring you excitement, whatever you work on bring you joy, and whatever you finish bring you satisfaction. Thank you for watching.